Well, don't get your hopes up. This is who killed Teresa. Today's story has elements of what I'm currently writing about. And in fact, I kind of got drawn in because there's a number of examples that are illustrative to some points I want to make. The puzzle of celebrity, excess, and indulgence, the lure of centers of power, like Montreal and New York City. It has a life in the fast lane quality to it, with shades of looking for Mr. Goodbar and the eyes of Laura Mars. This is the murder of Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine, a Montreal fashion model who was stabbed repeatedly in her Gramercy Park apartment in 1982 after an evening of disco dancing in a New York club.
Going out to nightclubs, drinking just champagne. And she has been checking nearly all the men.
A lot has been said about this case, most of it recently. People may say, oh, that case, we know all about that case. Why do you want to cover that? Well, it's an investigation with a very long trajectory, 40 years. And initially, there was not a lot that was particularly productive about what was said. It was all wrapped up in speculation and rumor. That wasn't very helpful. Marie-José's reputation got caught up in this speculation with a lot of suspicions and innuendo about the world of fashion and modeling. And I'll say right from the outset that Saint-Antoine is alleged to have been murdered by an associate, a Montreal television personality named Alain Montpetit. Alleged, the NYPD closed the books on this case using extraordinary evidence. So alleged is just, some continuing doubts in people's minds. But the matter is closed. It took authorities decades to discover Montpetit was the culprit, in part because of the difficulty of international investigations. But I would say, mainly because in Quebec, there was an apologist's attitude towards Alain Montpetit's increasingly erratic behavior, in many ways enabling him as he burned through all his, substance abused work opportunities. In fact, a lot of the media coverage of the case, initially, Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine is nothing but a mere, she's kind of like a grim footnote to the story. And always it's, this cult of personality of Alain Montpetit that takes center stage. So we pick up in late 1970. At that time, Saint-Antoine was just getting her modeling career off the ground in Montreal, and Montpetit had been DJing at a series of local radio stations. They were two local artists. They were part of a small clique that often got together on ski weekends in the Laurentians, the mountains north of Montreal, with partying going on afterwards into the morning hours at this local discotheque. And at the time, Montpetit was married to a dancer and a choreographer, and he had children. But the relationship periodically was on the rocks. They'd often separate. Montpetit was kind of like a local Don Juan, and was known to date several other women, but not Saint-Antoine. I want to make that clear. She was in this social circle. They were sort of like friends of friends, but they were not. The two of them were not close. By 1979, Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine, she's like a 23-year-old girl. She'd kind of outgrown Montreal, and she made the move to New York City. And immediately, her modeling career skyrocketed, and she was on the cover of glamour magazines. And Montpetit, certainly he's the talk of the town at this time, right? But he's a big fish in a small pond. In 1981, he was doing summer stock theater in the sticks. It's kind of like saying you're doing Oklahoma and the Catskills. The locals are impressed, but Montpetit seemed, he's kind of embarrassed by the venture. And here he is I have a clip here from a Montreal television show from 1981 called Musique Video, talking about this experience of doing summer stock theater.
There's also theater, right, in your career?
Yeah, I'll be in the theater all summer long. Between Valleyfield and Vaudreuil, a place called Coteau du Lac, right near Coteau Landing. And there's a theater there called the Pont Chateau Theater, which is obviously a professional theater. It's summer stock. And we'll be doing a show written by Ben Starr, an American, called The Button. It'll be in French, though. And we'll be doing that from June 25th to September 5th.
Ben Starr was just in town, wasn't he?
Well, he was in town to see us.
Oh, was he? That's what, okay, now I'm getting it
I had dinner
all
with him
together.
the other night, so check it out.
He's done a lot of things. He's written a bunch of TV shows.
He's a
and
producer
stuff,
for Different Strokes. He
Yeah.
was head writer on All in the Family at one time. He's a very, very successful man.
So this show is practically dinner theater. It probably was, let's just call it, probably was dinner theater. And Coteau du Lac is Nowheresville. It's not Coteau du Lac. That'd be something quite different. It's off the island of Montreal, over where Barbara Myers was murdered in 1976. We talked about the case of Barbara Myers. That's how obscure Coteau du Lac is. It's where you go to dump a body. In the day, if I was near Coteau du Lac for any reason, I know one thing. I'm probably on my way to Toronto, and I'm getting the fuck out of there. And this guy, Ben Starr, yeah, sure, he was an American television producer. He's most famous for writing the Brady Bunch episode, The Personality Kid, the one where Peter Brady thinks he's Humphrey Bogart, and he gives that line, pork chops and applesauce. So, this is hardly big time. And I would suggest that Montpetit is acutely aware of this. He wouldn't be umming his way through the interview if he had any confidence in this project. And calling it out specifically as professional theater is a sure indication that it was anything but. So in 1981, Alain Montpetit is clearly not where he thinks he's supposed to be in his career path. And, that path for Montpetit was, it's kind of like Tom Thumb, having this never-ending series of misadventures. To begin with, the guy was from the manor born. He's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His grandfather is Edouard Montpetit. You can't go anywhere in Montreal without running into like a street or a subway station or a concert hall named after Edouard Montpetit. I think one of the spaces in Place des Arts is named after him. But the name is everywhere. It's just immersive. I mean, I grew up knowing the name without knowing what the name meant. So he grew up in this affluent Westmount neighborhood, though, he liked to point out that he was actually born in the more peuple center of Outremont, because no one in Montreal wants to be cast as what they called him today, a Westmount snob. And you'll see this later. The snob we don't use that term very much anymore, but we used it a lot in the 70s, and people were very sensitive to it. I remember my sister using snob quite a bit, and you'll see later that Alain Montpetit is sensitive to this, to any kind of casting of him as someone of privilege. His father is a prominent judge, so Alain initially had aspirations to go to law school, but he landed at York University studying theater, and he did like a tour, if you're in the touring company of Stratford, the Stratford Festival, you're no great shakes. And that's what he was doing. He wasn't on the main stage. He wasn't in the young company. He was in the touring show. Which is odd. I've heard it said that he went to the National Theatre School. I was talking about this last time. Actually, that's in the Wikipedia page on Alain Montpetit. Again, don't read that shit. There is no evidence that I can find that Alain Montpetit attended Canada's prestigious National Theatre School. And then, from the Wikipedia page, some other podcaster repeats it. So now it becomes, part of the story, and it's not true. His wife said he went to York, and his wife would know because she was a dancer at the time. They were young artists at the time. And why is it important? Because the difference between the National Theatre School and York in Canada is like the difference in the United States of saying you went to Juilliard or Yale when you really went to like the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Good schools, but a big difference. So no, I don't. He went to York University in Toronto, and then later, he shows up in Los Angeles in the early 1970s. He enrolled in political science courses at UCLA, and started working in student radio stations. And it's around this time he gets a part-time job clerking for the county court in LA County, serving papers. There's an article where he talks about serving Johnny Carson, and it was the biggest thrill of his life. That's the apex. He never completed his UCLA studies. From what I can tell, he never completed anything. He never had the focus and dedication to finish anything, and that's a problem. And we next find Alain Montpetit back in Quebec, on the border of Maine, heading up this pirate radio station. In 1974, he lands a job with the English CKGM radio station, and he actually covers many true crime cases in the day. He was part of the entourage in the famous Richard Blass car chase through the streets of Montreal. So he's bilingual. He's skilled in both languages. It was not unusual for Montpetit in those days to start his day on English radio, only to hop over to French television by the afternoon and finish the day, doing infotainment. We didn't call it then, but that then, but that's what it was. And oh, by the way, at the same time, he's also doing a soap opera. This soap opera on French TV called Le Clan de Beaulieu. So busy guy.
Colored one came into the world, it made me crazy. Don't get what you want, you scream and you shout, you're still a baby.
Things changed in the late 70s. Montpetit joined the French disco show Et ça tourne. It turns. So this is in the high-flying era, right, of Donna Summer and disco divas, all this kind of thing. And this is when Alain Montpetit truly becomes a local celebrity. He's dubbed Montreal's disco king. During this period, it would not have been out of character for Montpetit and others to be jet-setting between the clubs in Montreal and New York. So, like Studio 54 in New York on a Friday, and then hop on back to Montreal to the Limelight on Crescent on a Saturday. Lots of Coke and Dom Perignon along the way. He would do these shows right at the Limelight. They'd have kind of like a fashion show with disco music, and he'd call the show. I have no doubt, this is 70, in 78. I'm not quite sure when he started Saturn, but it's completely possible that my sister Teresa saw him at the Limelight, because Teresa went to the Limelight quite a bit to dance. She was pretty safe about it. She traveled in an entourage of girls. They'd all go in a group together and dance together, leave together, that kind of thing. But depending on the timing, I have no doubt that she probably, when the lights went down and there's girls on the runway and there's a disco ball and Atlantis to the side, calling out being funny and entertaining and all that she was there. And at this time, there's a lot was made, and it continues to be made about his celebrity, about how, he's a good looking guy, and which he was, but then, they bend things all out of shape. He's one of the 10 best looking guys in Montreal. And, I'd merely point out, he was also on a list of the 10 worst dressed guys in Montreal. He could glam up when he wanted to, but he's most comfortable in a sloppy t-shirt. He's on this list alongside well-known slobs Mordecai Richler and Tommy Schumacher. So you need to take these things with a pound of salt. What's a big deal in Quebec is small potatoes outside that fishbowl. There's this overriding sense that Quebec is not really supposed to talk about this case. It has an element of taboo. It's okay to drag out the sordid mysteries of, say, a Sharon Pryor or a Cédric Provencher, or more recently Marilyn Bergeron. But Montpetit and Saint-Antoine are kind of off limits because they moved in a higher social circle. It's not unlike the Michel Perron case we covered, where we're not supposed to talk about it because the suspect was a famous television personality. And the case involved Claire Leger, another one who's to the manor born, right? The heir to the Saint-Hubert chicken empire. So there's a hands-off attitude to this stuff. When Montpetit's sister was contacted after he became a suspect, she just brushed the matter off, with an air of entitlement, she said, that's an old story. I'm not interested in commenting. Just sort of, it doesn't matter whether you're interested or not. You don't want to talk to the press. Perhaps you'd like to talk to the police if we can wake them up. Fortunately, this didn't happen on the Quebec police's watch. It happened in New York City, but we'll get to that. Spoiler alert, Montpetit died of a drug overdose in a Washington, D.C. hotel 5 years after Saint Antoine's murder. And for years, the Quebec press wouldn't entertain even the possibility that the radio host might have been involved in the model's murder. You know, I say that, but it was mostly the English press. The French tabloids, particularly Allo Police and Photo Police, they had a field day with this stuff. You know, the gloves come off with them, man. Many papers reported that Montpetit died of a, quote, heart failure, just conveniently leaving out the part about that the heart failure was brought about by snorting massive amounts of cocaine. The Montreal Gazette is particularly odious and culpable here. They did a 3-page eulogy to Montpetit, and they never once acknowledged that he was once a suspect in Saint Antoine's murder. That all of his when you put the pieces together, his came to be sociopathic behavior is just kind of explained away about how he was troubled, you know, in this facile manner, but they say he's wrestling with demons. He had a hard time living up to, you know, his family's reputation, all of this nonsense. And in this 1987 appreciation, his on again, off again wife, Nancy Moretti, is interviewed, and she goes along with what I would say is just a hollow narrative. And she says, this is her, he had a hard drive inside him that really pushed hard, maybe too hard. Then in this like this stunning display of blithe ignorance, she says, it was his own battle. He had an incredible amount of talent, and it wasn't being used. There's no blame anywhere. Tabarnouche. I mean, really? You know, outside of some like tabloid page red meat, there was, you know, where was the appreciation piece for Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine? You'd have a hard time finding it. Here's what the author of this piece was: a CJFM program director named Mark Burns. And this is what he had to write about Saint Antoine's death in that article. A highly publicized scandal created by the French language tabloids resulted in a lawsuit. The story dealt with the death in New York City of a model who had been a close family friend. Lie. It was just an episode, upsetting at the time, but quickly settled out of court with no lasting effect on either party in the suit. It apparently made little difference to Alain in his larger struggles. So Saint Antoine's murder is reimagined, right? It's retold as a scandal. It's not a murder, it's a scandal. And her offender is recast as a close family friend, which he was not. I mean, you know, tabarnak, is it any wonder that 2 years later, 2 years after her death, her father took his own life by jumping off the balcony of his apartment. And, you know, for a while, we didn't know much about Saint Antoine because there wasn't a lot written about her in English. It was always the Alain Montpetit show in life and in, you know, in death. In a 2001 interview, finally, Paul Cherry of the Gazette, he interviews Marie-José's brother, Jean-Luc, who finally, you know, he expresses the grief and the you know, the humiliation his family suffered The day of the murder, Marie-Josée was planning to fly back to Montreal to surprise her dad for Father's Day. But he never, she never made it. So you can imagine how that impacted him and the family. After her death, the father sunk into an immediate deep depression. He went through several treatments of electroshock therapy. It didn't take, and then 2 years later, took his own life. Their mother refused to speak on the event. She couldn't. She would immediately burst into tears. Even 20 years afterwards, it was so traumatic to discuss. And in this article, Jean-Luc Saint-Antoine reveals how immediately after the murder, he received a disturbing phone call from New York City. And this is the point where the case begins to turn and open up. And he says in this article with Paul Cherry, Alain called me from New York and asked if he could go and identify the body for the family. I asked him what he was doing there. I figured it was strange that he was there because he was supposed to still be in Belgium in rehab. So yeah, a city of 5-10 million people, and there's, a Quebecer dies, and there just happens to be this other Quebecer there at the same time who's not supposed to be there. So what is Alain Montpetit doing in New York City? No one found this strange. Apparently, the New York police, they said they found it suspicious, but according to them, they were having a really, really hard time running down witnesses. This is from a different article, but it's a detective on the case. At one point, it took us 6 months just to find 5 people who knew her and live in the U.S. Police apathy, man. I mean, ultimately, they did a good job, but I'm having a really hard time buying this argument that policing is really hard. But let's let that slide for the moment. I'll add that if the police were having a hard time piecing things together, Jean-Luc Saint-Antoine and the reporter, the investigative reporter Claude Poirier, were not. Poirier, who we've talked about before here, he happened to be at Jean-Luc's side the afternoon that Montpetit called the Saint-Antoine home. A number of reporters were summoned to the Saint-Antoine house, and he was one of them. So he was there, and he happened to record that telephone conversation. The call from Montpetit. He's there. He knew what was going on. He turned on his recorder, and it was Poirier and Jean-Luc who first adamantly insisted that Alain Montpetit killed Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine. By the turn of the century, this is moving into the 2000s, police began to take a renewed interest in the case when one of Montpetit's girlfriends, who had provided the alibi, changed her story that he had been with her the afternoon of the murder. The night of June 17th, 1982, so the night of the night before the murder, Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine had been partying with Grace Jones and John F. Kennedy Jr. at a famous New York City discotheque called Xenon. And where was Alain Montpetit? He was a celebrity, but was he at the level where he could hang with these people? Montpetit created a lot of press in Quebec. The majority of it, though, when you really go back and look, was in television rags like Tele Radio Monde, which is kind of like the Quebec TV Guide, really. I mean, these publications were owned by the television and radio stations, and they're designed to promote their products. So it's really weak press. Quebecor does this to this day. I follow Pierre-Carl Pelledeau, who owns Quebecor, on Twitter, and he's the CEO. And every once in a while, you'll see him pumping up some god awful show of his, and saying it's must see TV. You must tune into this tonight. And you're kind of like, what the heck is going on here? And then you go, oh yeah, it's just old Pierre shilling for PKP. So this is an old tradition in anywhere, but particularly in Quebec, where the money go round and the churn, the entertainment churn. It's just the same. It's just the same people over and over again, right? It must be exhausting. So Alain Monpetit was a local celebrity, but I really think he was, he would have been punching above his weight, trying to keep up with music stars and the sons of former presidents. But I would suggest that he may have been bitterly resentful that Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine had risen to the point in her career where she could hang with these people. By this point, Saint-Antoine, she'd left the Ford modeling agency, which is a more traditional modeling agency, and she was working for the younger and hipper elite. She was one of the top print fashion models in New York. So she had outgrown Quebec. As kind of a peer in that clique, that group, Alain Monpetit had not. He was still stuck in it. This is another excerpt from that music video interview with Andy Nullman in 1981. For the context of this, this interview was done 1 year prior to the murder of Saint-Antoine in the spring. And here Monpetit is talking about why he grew to dislike the United States. But it's clear that what's eating at him is that he failed there, right? It's his experience in LA, I would imagine. It's better that you view this whole interview, the entire thing, on YouTube. And I've placed a link to it on the website, theresaallore.com, TheresaAllore.com. And so you can see the whole YouTube interview. But this is an excerpt from it. But there's an overarching impression in it that when you look through the charm and the smiles and the laughs, Alain Monpetit was a pretty nasty guy.
Why would you come back, let's say, after being in LA and, the grand golden United States? Why would you come back to Montreal, home base?
Well, the sickness that's apparent in American society right now was just revealing itself when I left. It's very nice to talk about the golden United States until you live there. A lot of people who talk about the United States have never lived there.
Yeah.
I lived there for 6 years of my life. I can tell you a lot about the States, the West Coast, the way people relate to each other, the violence. There is a part of the United States that's very, very ugly. And I'm not putting the States down. It's still a country I enjoy a great deal. I go there regularly. I was there 2 weeks ago.
So it's amazing to me that here's this guy preaching about the violence and the ugliness in the United States. Was this sickness that he's referring to revealing itself in him? And then 1 year later, he travels to New York, stalks a woman, chases her upstairs to her apartment, and stabs her repeatedly to death in the heart.
Looking for the good life, dressed to kill. She don't have to worry, 'cause there's always someone else who will. Loose and loaded every night, dancing underneath the flashing lights, saying, look at me, baby, look at me. I'm beautiful, I'm somebody. Just slip into the arms of...
Then he comes back to Canada and he immediately assumes this defensive posture of poor me and defamation and all this, and how the media needs to stop chasing him and just let him get on with his pursuit of celebrity. A month after Saint-Antoine's murder, Monpetit complained in a La Presse interview that he felt persecuted, lost like a hero in a Hitchcock film. That's Montpetit. Yeah, he was cast in a Hitchcock film, but he wasn't cast as Cary Grant. He was playing the part of Raymond Burr.
And Rome is burning, but that's alright. Just slip into the arms of the disco spring.
I've been avoiding the actual murder because, hey, it's like every other murder, right? Man hunting woman down. The cold case investigator assigned to Saint Antoine's case with the NYPD, Stefano Braccini, made an observation. He said something, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, murder is always about people, crimes of passion, or money, and usually drug money, and they're mostly committed by men. A lot of ink has been spilt on the subject, but I wish somebody would just say it like that. Nonetheless, this is what apparently happened in June 1982. So Alain Montpetit's alibi was this: he was not in New York City, according to him, when Saint Antoine died. He's in Belgium, right? He tells Jean-Luc he's in Belgium. Somebody else were under the impression he was in Madrid in rehab. Then later his girlfriend, Jackie Lee, tells investigators he was in New Orleans. And it was only later that Jackie Lee confessed that while they did travel to New Orleans, their flight plan was such that they had a 2 or 3 day layover in New York, the city, during the timeline of the murder. But anyway, he had told Marie-José's brother he was in New York City, allegedly contacting Jean-Luc before police had even spoken to the family. But why bring up the facts, right? So Montpetit had instructed Jackie Lee to tell the police he was with her in New Orleans, but he was actually at Zenon the night before Marie-Josée died. He had gained entry using a press pass, and he and Jackie Lee, his girlfriend, had both observed Marie-Josée dancing that night. Saint Antoine came home around 1 a.m. that night to her Gramercy Park apartment, which was located at 246 East 23rd Street and 2nd Avenue. Nice neighborhood. The next afternoon, the actress Dana Delaney, who was 21 at the time, doing the soap opera All My Children. Later she'd be on a number, I think she's on China Beach, she's on NYPD Blue. So Dana Delaney runs into Saint Antoine on the street in Gramercy Park, and she's with a man who she did not introduce to Delaney. And in a composite sketch that Delaney later drew, the man looked like Montpetit, but it was problematic because he also looked like Jamie Gillis, an apartment neighbor of Saint Antoine. And this led to like a red herring in the case, that Jamie Gillis was an adult film star. So immediately suspicions grew that, was there some kind of kinking relationship between Saint Antoine and Gillis? Stuff like Gillis did bondage films, which is, you don't blink an eye at that today. You did back then. So, this theory forms that Gillis might have murdered the model, Saint Antoine, purely on the basis of, one, he was a porn star, and therefore, two, he just happened to speak French, and three, he apparently was a really good porn star actor. They called him like the De Niro or Pacino of porn. Police, by the way, also speculated at the time that it might have been her boyfriend, a fashion photographer named Dominique Silberstein, who committed the murder. An excellent theory. Yes, you should suspect the boyfriend. But unlike Montpetit, Silberstein had an ironclad alibi where he was observed by several models at a photo shoot during the timeline of the murder. Around 5:30 p.m. on June 18th, 1982, Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine returns to her apartment. And just in short succession, Jamie Gillis also enters the building. I think after being at the track all afternoon, horse racing. And he notices Saint Antoine's white-heeled shoes at the base of the ground floor stairs. So he finds this suspicious. Gillis and his then girlfriend, Kathleen O'Reilly, they then walked up the 4 flights to her apartment to check on their neighbor, on Marie-Josée. They had a spare key, as you would, it's a small building, it's 4 floors. I believe it was only 4 apartments. So everyone would have been tight. So they use the key, but when they open the door, they find that the door, there's a weight against it. And Marie-Josée is discovered lying face down, dressed in jeans and a blouse. She's stabbed several times in the heart. She's stabbed once in the back. And there are defensive wounds on her arm and bruises on her body. There were no signs of forced entry or robbery. Like the building had a buzzer entry system, which meant that the assailant she let him in, or he followed her in. You enter and then you sneak in. Police almost immediately deemed the murder, quote, emotionally driven crime, believing the 23-year-old model knew her killer. It looks like she let him in the door, is what a detective commented. I think in the New York Daily News, the morning after the murder. With the shoes and the entry and all that, she either let him in or the person followed her in. Police speculated that she had left her shoes to make walking up the stairs, or possibly running, as she's being pursued up the stairs, easier. But the cold case investigator, Stefano Brascini, he offered another theory, and I think it's a good one, that the assailant may have removed the shoes from the 4th floor apartment and brought them down to the entrance foyer in kind of a staging mechanism to ensure that Saint Antoine would be discovered more quickly, and that this possibly indicated signs of remorse. That is part 1 of the model who killed Marie-Josée Saint-Antoine. We'll pick it up shortly with part 2. If you like the podcast, you can follow us on social media. The easiest way to do that is to go to the website teresalure.com, and there are links there to Twitter, to Facebook, to Instagram. We'll return quickly. This has been Who Killed Teresa? I'm your host, John Allure. Have yourselves a great afternoon.
materialize. Some lovers never meet by mistake on the street. I hang you there on the mantle by the stairs beside the litho of Lord Black, who never bloody called me back.